Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Israeli Government Spokesman Eylon Levy. This is day 58 of the war with Hamas after the October 7th massacre. First, a brief update, and then we will take your questions in person and over Zoom. Since declaring war on Israel with the October 7th massacre and brutally massacring 1,200 Israelis, Hamas has fired over 11,000 rockets at Israel, including a very large barrage at Israeli families in central Israel last night, sending millions of people running to their rocket shelters. Around 2,000 rockets have fallen short and landed back inside the Gaza Strip, causing untold casualties and damage in Gaza, which of course come under those casualty numbers that Hamas has been releasing and some have been reporting uncritically. The IDF has notified the families of 398 soldiers that their loved ones have fallen in battle, and that is in addition to 59 fallen members of the police forces. An update now about the hostage numbers. As of this morning, and with no change since Hamas decided to violate the hostage release pause, Hamas still holds 137 hostages. Of those, 117 are male and 20 female. Of those, 126 are Israelis, with another 11 foreign nationals, 8 from Thailand, 1 Nepalese, 1 Tanzanian, and 1 French-Mexican. Of those 137 hostages, the IDF has informed families that 13 were subsequently murdered after the start of the October 7th massacre, with Hamas still holding their bodies hostage in the Gaza Strip. Among those hostages are 2 children under the age of 18, the 2 Bibas children, who will of course be familiar to everyone, having become emblematic of Hamas's crimes against humanity on October 7th, and there are 10 hostages aged 75 and older, including the husbands of many of the elderly women who have been released as part of the hostage release pause. So far, 110 people have been released from Hamas captivity, 86 of them Israelis and 24 foreigners. 3 murdered hostages, their bodies have been subsequently located by the IDF. 6 people still remain missing in the wake of the October 7th massacre. As we said on Friday, the hostage release pause could have been extended to get more hostages out, and we had approved a sufficient list of Palestinian violent criminals in Israeli jails to proceed with an exchange for at least another 2 days. Unfortunately, Hamas decided to terminate that pause by failing to release all the abducted women and children as it was obligated to do so, and by resuming rocket fire. Hamas started this war on October 7th, and it restarted this war on December 1st. Following Hamas's decision to violate and terminate the hostage release pause and resume hostilities on December 1st, and following a subsequent impasse in negotiations, the Prime Minister instructed Mossad Director David Barnea and his team to return to Israel from Doha. After a 7-day pause, Hamas decided to hold on to the remaining women and children in captivity and resume its war against the Israeli people. The coordinator for the hostages and missing persons, retired Brigadier General Gal Hirsch, met yesterday with U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs Roger Carstens and his team, their second meeting in recent days. They discussed ongoing efforts to secure the release of the hostages. Brigadier General Hirsch expressed our appreciation for the United States' deep commitment, unwavering support, and continuous commitment since the outbreak of this war with the October 7th massacre. We thank the Director of the CIA, the Egyptian Intelligence Minister, and the Qatari Prime Minister for their extensive joint mediation efforts. As the survivors of Hamas captivity begin to open up to their families, we are beginning to learn about the tip of the iceberg of the physical and psychological abuse to which Hamas has been subjected our people in captivity for 58 days and counting. Little Emily Hand, who spoke only in whispers after she was released, was returned to her father covered in lice. Yocheved Lipschitz, an 85-year-old woman whose husband Oded is still hostage, has described being held for weeks in a tunnel with diminishing oxygen supply and little food. She says she was only released because she fell sick and her captors feared she would cause an epidemic in their tunnel network. She's fearful for the remaining hostages, worried that the terrorists will take revenge on them, and fearful for both their physical well-being and their mental health. Survivor, 84-year-old Ditza Hyman, has described Hamas's treatment with those paltry food provisions as starvation. An 84-year-old woman, starvation. Danielle Aloni, abducted with her 5-year-old daughter Amelia, reports that Hamas simply executed some of the hostages. It was, to quote this brave survivor of Hamas captivity, a horror movie. This is only the tip of the iceberg of revelations about the Hamas terror dungeons, and we are fighting to secure the release of all the remaining hostages, women and men, young and old, civilians and soldiers. It is only unrelenting military pressure combined with intense diplomatic efforts that has secured the release of those 110. There will be no one left behind. We will continue fighting to bring back the remaining 137. None of us are free till all of them are free. An operational update, more to update now that Hamas has decided to resume hostilities. Following Hamas's regrettable decision to terminate the hostage release pause and resume hostilities, the IDF has resumed targeting Hamas terror targets, striking more than 400 over the weekend, including extensive aerial attacks in the Khan Yunis area and eliminating terrorists and their terror army infrastructure in Beit Lahia. Since the start of the war, the IDF has located 800 tunnel shafts and destroyed 500 of them, in addition to many miles of tunnel routes under civilian areas. Our soldiers are finding large quantities of weapons in those shafts connected to Hamas's military assets via an extensive underground tunnel network. Many of those shafts were found inside or nearby civilian structures, including schools, kindergartens, mosques and playgrounds, and the IDF has already released footage of one of those tunnels located on the grounds of a school, a clear crime against humanity and cynical exploitation of civilian infrastructure. Over the weekend, the Israeli Navy has been targeting Hamas naval and military assets in the Khan Yunis Marina and Deir al-Balah area in southern Gaza. Yesterday, the IDF announced it had eliminated Hamas's Shaja'iyya battalion commander Wassam Farhat. Farhat was responsible for the killing of 6 IDF soldiers during Operation Protective Edge in 2014 and sent Hamas Nukba terrorists into kibbutz Nahal Oz and the Nahal Oz IDF post on October 7th, bearing direct responsibility for the atrocities there. He was also one of the masterminds of the Mechinat Atzmona 2002 attack, killing 5 Israeli civilians, and the anti-tank missile terror attack on a civilian bus in Nahal Oz in 2011, killing an Israeli child. Taking out that terrorist there, a reminder of the enduring threat that Hamas has posed to the people of Israel, not only on and since October 7th, but in the 16 preceding years of its reign of terror inside the Gaza Strip. An update from the northern border. Today, an anti-tank missile was launched towards an IDF vehicle in the area of Beit Hillel. Several IDF soldiers sustained light injuries as a result of the shrapnel, and the vehicle was damaged. In addition, several launches in the area of Mount Dov and Iftah were identified, some of which fell inside Lebanese territory. IDF artillery has been striking the sources of the fire. That brings us to the end of today's update, and we'll now take your questions. Thank you.
Okay, question from Chloe Cornish, Financial Times. IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari said on December 1st that Hamas was holding 17 women and children. If I heard correctly, you just said Hamas was holding 20. Have 3 more women or children been found?
Hello, Chloe. Good to hear from you. The numbers are 117 male, including the 2 Bibas children, and 20 female. Those are also the numbers that we reported during this briefing on Friday afternoon, and those numbers have remained unchanged.
Question from Howard Goller from Reuters. What is Israel's response to US Vice President Harris saying too many innocent Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, and Defense Secretary Austin saying that without better protection of civilians, Israel risks their radicalization?
First of all, we completely agree that far too many people have been killed in this war. It's a sad fact that everyone who has been killed since October 7th, since 6:30 in the morning, would still be alive if Hamas had not decided to launch this war with the October 7th massacre and to fight this war from inside densely populated areas that it has been trying to prevent being evacuated. The Israeli army has made every effort, upholding our obligations under international law, to get civilians out of harm's way. That's why we urged an extensive evacuation of northern Gaza before beginning the ground offensive. That's why, after encircling Gaza City, we secured a humanitarian corridor for civilians to be able to leave. That's why, in addition, we put in place tactical pauses to encourage evacuations. The sad fact is Hamas has spent the last 16 years cynically embedding its terror infrastructure under schools, under mosques, under homes, under hospitals, as we've all seen from the extensive evidence of the tunnel network under the Shifa hospital. Hamas did that as part of a sick and cynical strategy of human shields, hoping that it could perpetrate attacks against the Israeli people and then escape justice by hiding behind women and children. So the IDF, while Hamas has been trying to maximize civilian casualties, has been making every effort to minimize civilian casualties. Fair to say we definitely surrendered the element of surprise as well with those extensive efforts that we made to get civilians out of harm's way. Those efforts to protect Palestinian civilians from their own leaders' reckless decisions to try to use them as human shields are ongoing. On Friday, the IDF published an online map, which is familiar to the residents of northern Gaza, dividing the area into very small specific zones so that we can facilitate evacuations from areas where Hamas has been operating in violation of humanitarian law from within civilian areas. And we're going to continue making efforts to get civilians out of harm's way from areas where Hamas is trying to hide behind them, because there will be nowhere to hide for the Hamas terrorists who perpetrated the October 7th massacre and have ever since been promising to perpetrate repeat atrocities against our people. Those are legitimate military targets, and we will do everything we can to get civilians out of harm's way so that we can reach those targets.
Question from Hannah Julian. When tunnel shafts are destroyed during operations, what happens with the tunnels themselves and the other shafts along the route?
The IDF has been employing a range of engineering means to destroy the tunnel shafts. Obviously, each case is different, and I can't comment on the tactics that the IDF has been taking to destroy all of the shafts. But if you're interested in more information, the IDF has discussed that in previous press releases, and I'm sure you can contact the IDF spokesperson's unit. By the way, for anyone listening on this call, for any further questions you have about operational matters.
A question from Sami Tissa, Bernie News Network. What is the reaction of international representatives about the ceasefire violation by Hamas? We know US Secretary of State Blinken was here, so did he have a comment? And secondly, since we are now in a new phase of conflict, what lessons learned from before the ceasefire will be used now from both a military perspective and a PR one?
Any questions you have about international reactions, I would advise you to speak to the persons whose reactions you are seeking. I speak here for the Israeli government. I can tell you what our reactions are to the violation of the ceasefire, which is that when Hamas decided to start firing rockets at Israel and not release women and children as obligated, it resumed hostilities, and therefore we resumed our campaign in order to put pressure to bring back the hostages and ultimately lead to the end of Hamas. And that campaign is going to continue until we get all the hostages home and until total victory.
Question from Shoshana Solomon. Please repeat how many rockets have been fired at Israel since October 7th and how many since the resumption of fighting after the pause, please.
Since the beginning of the October 7th massacre, Hamas has fired over 11,000 rockets at Israel. We know that around 2,000 of those have fallen short and landed back in the Gaza Strip. Most famously, of course, the rocket shrapnel that fell in the car park of the Al-Ahli hospital. And it's important that when people report on casualty numbers in the Gaza Strip, whether it is those numbers that are being supplied by Hamas, the same army of terror that perpetrated the October 7th massacre, or other estimates, those numbers include the people, the untold numbers of people who have been killed as a result of errant rocket fire from inside the Gaza Strip that have fallen short, as I said, of course, including everyone at the Al-Ahli hospital car park, whether you're going with the original 800 number made up by Hamas or with the far lower estimates provided by Western intelligence.
Jim Williams, Zenga International News Service, Washington, D.C. How realistic is it that the hostage exchange for a war pause could be restarted?
We, of course, will welcome any serious possibility to get the remaining 137 hostages back out of the Gaza Strip. Israel's strategy throughout this war has been to put unrelenting military pressure on Hamas in order to get it to return those hostages. To that end, we agreed to a temporary pause in the fighting in order to facilitate getting those hostages out. And to the extent that Hamas is willing to release those remaining hostages, including, as we said, the 20 women who are still there, including the two children, and of course, including the 115 men our brothers, our sons, our husbands, our fathers. Their lives are worth no less. We will, of course, consider any serious proposal in order to get them out.
Question from Joel. Does Israel feel...
Who is Joel? What news outlet is this? When you write questions, please, if you could write your news outlets as well, please, in the comments.
Does Israel feel there's been a loss of international support since the pause? How about internal morale?
First of all, internal morale in Israel is very strong. We are discovering the tip of the iceberg of the atrocious conditions to which our hostages faced inside the Gaza Strip, including the children, the physical and psychological abuse that they suffered. And those stories have only strengthened the very strong sense of justice and resolve within Israeli society that this war must end with the end of Hamas, because even though we have most of the children back, we will not leave in power the army of terror that abducted them in the first place and abused them in that way. This has only been a very vivid reminder of the necessity of ending this war with total victory. And internationally as well, we know that our partners and international allies stand foursquare with us as we continue with this fight to destroy Hamas in response to the October 7th massacre. The United States, other Western nations have been very clear from the beginning of this war that totally destroying Hamas in response to the October 7th massacre, while upholding our obligations under international law, is of course a legitimate military target, and that there can be no impunity for the terrorists who perpetrated, I'll repeat, the deadliest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, the worst terror attack in world history after 9/11. Western nations, the free world, understands that the consequences of inaction, the consequences of allowing Hamas to remain in power in response to such atrocities, represent a clear and present danger to international peace and security, and not only to the security of Israel's citizens.
Last question from JNS David Isaac. Could you confirm whether Secretary of State Blinken said that Israel doesn't have months to complete its military activities as reported during the meeting between Blinken and the War Cabinet last week?
We're not going to comment on remarks that may or may not have been made behind closed doors in sensitive diplomatic discussions. We know that the United States has been very clear from day one that the only way this war can end is with the end of Hamas. Israel and the United States see eye to eye about the goals of this war. We are in agreement about the need to continue this campaign in response to Hamas's decision to resume hostilities on December 1st, and the United States has played a pivotal role as well in the diplomatic efforts to get hostages back. Those efforts, of course, having been facilitated by this military pressure. And I will refer you just to the statement that President Biden made in his Washington Post column. I believe it was from a week ago, saying that when this war ends, it must end with a new reality in the Gaza Strip, such that neither Gaza nor the West Bank, critically, can ever again serve as a base for terror attacks against the Israeli people. This has gone on for too long, and with this war, it will end. Thank you very much, everyone. Everyone keep safe, and we will see you tomorrow. I'll update you about the exact time of the press briefing. Thank you very much.